American lion bones keep turning up in places the prevailing models say they should not be, specifically in Alaska, in concentrations and contexts that have quietly puzzled paleontologists for decades. Not a stray fossil here or there. Bones from a predator that, according to the textbook version of its range and behavior, simply had no business being there in the numbers the permafrost keeps producing. And the deeper researchers dig into Alaska's frozen ground, the stranger the picture gets. We are not talking about a minor footnote in prehistoric biology. We are talking about a ghost, a massive, poorly understood apex predator that left its bones across a landscape it supposedly never fully occupied, then vanished so completely that most people have never heard its name. Today I want to take you into the Boneyard. We are going to look at what the American lion actually was, why Alaska is both the best and most confusing place in the world to find its remains, what the bones themselves seem to be telling us about an ancient world we thought we had mapped, and why the honest answer to where this animal came from is still, genuinely, up for debate. Let's start with the animal itself, because if you have never encountered the American lion before, the first thing you need to know is that it was enormous. Panthera leo atrox, that is its formal name, and the species epithet atrox means terrible or savage in Latin, which turns out to be entirely appropriate. The American lion was not a saber-tooth. It was not a distant relative of today's mountain lion. It was a true lion, closely related to the lions alive on the African savanna right now, and by most estimates it was larger than any modern lion by a significant margin. Some analyses suggest it may have outweighed a large African male by a quarter or more of that animal's body weight. It was, in short, one of the largest felids that has ever walked the earth. To put that in concrete terms, a large male African lion today weighs somewhere between 400 and 420 pounds. Skeletal reconstructions of Panthera leo atrox, particularly those drawing on specimens recovered from the La Brea tar pits in Los Angeles, which have produced hundreds of individual American lion bones since systematic excavation began there in the early 20th century, suggest the American lion routinely exceeded 500 pounds and may have approached 600 in the largest individuals. That is not a marginal difference. That is a fundamentally different class of animal, one whose hunting strategy, territorial requirements, and prey preferences would all have scaled accordingly. The La Brea material alone, catalogued and studied intensively since the 1910s, gives us a skeletal picture of extraordinary completeness for an extinct predator. And what that picture shows is an animal built for power over long distances, longer limbs relative to body mass than modern African lions, suggesting a capacity for sustained pursuit across open terrain. It roamed North America through the Pleistocene epoch, that long, cold stretch of geological time that most of us think of simply as the Ice Age. From what fossil evidence has accumulated over the years, it appears to have ranged widely, into Central America, across the Great Plains, into parts of the Pacific Northwest. But Alaska is where things get interesting, and where the story starts to crack open in ways that are genuinely difficult to explain away. Alaska sits at the top of the continent like a locked room that keeps yielding surprises. The key to those surprises is permafrost, permanently frozen ground that acts, over thousands of years, like a natural deep freeze. Bones buried in permafrost do not simply mineralize in the way fossils normally do. They are preserved, sometimes in extraordinary detail. Researchers working in Alaskan sites have pulled out Pleistocene megafauna remains with cartilage still attached, with hair, with skin. The cold is almost archival in its precision. The sites, sometimes called boneyards, places where ancient remains concentrate in unusual density, exist across Alaska, particularly in areas where erosion, river cutting, or permafrost thaw exposes deep stratigraphic layers. Think of a river cutting down through time, slicing through centuries of accumulated sediment, and spilling out the contents of one era after another along its banks. Woolly mammoths, steppe bison, horses, yes, wild horses native to North America, a fact that still surprises people, short-faced bears, and among them, again and again, the bones of the American lion. The Old Crow Basin in Yukon, just across the border from Alaska proper, has been one of the most productive of these sites since the 1960s, when researchers began recovering Pleistocene fauna in quantities that reshaped how scientists understood the northern reaches of the mammoth steppe. The permafrost exposures along the Yukon River and its tributaries have yielded American lion material dating to between roughly 25,000 and 13,000 years before present, bracketing the last glacial maximum with uncomfortable neatness. Further west, sites in the Fairbanks region of interior Alaska, some of them exposed by gold mining operations that have been churning through frozen ground since the late 19th century, have produced lion material that gold miners in the early 1900s initially set aside as curiosities before researchers recognized what they were looking at. Thousands of Pleistocene bones came out of those mining operations with essentially no scientific documentation, a loss that paleontologists still mourn. What was recovered and described, however, was enough to establish the American lion as a genuine and recurring presence in that landscape. Now here is where it starts to get strange. The distribution of American lion remains across the continent suggests, broadly, a preference for open grassland and steppe environments, the kind of landscape where large prey animals congregated in number. That makes intuitive sense. A predator that size needs prey that size, and prey that size tends to run in herds across open ground. Alaska during the Pleistocene actually fits this description reasonably well. What is now tundra and boreal forest was, during the height of the last glacial maximum, part of a vast ecosystem researchers call the mammoth steppe, a cold but productive grassland environment that stretched from Western Europe all the way across Siberia and into Beringia, the land bridge that connected Asia and North America when sea levels were dramatically lower than today. At the glacial maximum, roughly 21,000 years ago, sea levels were approximately 400 feet lower than they are now. The exposed landmass between Siberia and Alaska was not a narrow strip. It was a subcontinent, Beringia, stretching perhaps 1,000 miles from north to south at its widest point. This was not a crossing. This was a landscape, and animals did not traverse it so much as live on it for generations. So in theory, Alaska during the Ice Age was lion country. The habitat was right, the prey was there. And yet something about the pattern of remains keeps nagging at researchers who look at the whole picture carefully. The bones appear in places and in combinations that do not always line up with the expected behavioral profile. There are sites where the remains appear in context suggesting the animals were not simply passing through, but the population evidence, the breeding evidence, the full ecological picture one would expect from a truly established apex predator, is thin in ways that are hard to dismiss. Some paleontologists have noted that the American lion in Alaska seems almost like a visitor, present enough to leave substantial evidence, but absent in the way a fully integrated population leaves its mark on an ecosystem over many generations. Whether that impression holds up as more evidence surfaces is genuinely uncertain. I want to be honest with you about that. The field is still actively working through these questions, and the frozen ground keeps producing new data. But the unease in the scientific literature about how to classify the American lion's presence in Alaska is real, and it points towards something more interesting than a simple range map. Which brings us to the question of where this animal actually came from, and here is where the mystery opens up into something almost vertiginous in its implications. The American lion's closest living relatives are Old World lions. Its closest extinct relatives appear to include the cave lion of Eurasia, Panthera spelaea, a similarly massive cat that prowled the forests and grasslands of Europe and Asia during the same broad time period. The relationship between these two animals, the American and the Eurasian, has been debated for a long time, and it touches directly on the question of why the American lion's bones turn up in Alaska with such regularity. One possibility, favored by many researchers, is that the ancestor of the American lion crossed from Eurasia into North America via Beringia at some point during the Pleistocene, and then evolved into the distinct North American form we find in the fossil record. Under this model, Alaska is not an anomaly, it is an entry point. The remains concentrated in Alaskan boneyards are not evidence of an animal out of place. They are evidence of an animal that moved through and eventually populated a continent. The density of remains in Alaska simply reflects the fact that this was where the crossing happened, where populations initially established, where generations lived and died before the descendants spread further south. But there is a competing interpretation that is harder to brush aside. Some researchers have pointed to evidence suggesting the genetic and morphological picture is more complicated than a clean one-time migration. There are aspects of the American lion's anatomy that suggest a longer, more complex evolutionary history in the Americas, than a simple Beringian crossing would predict. And then there are the DNA questions, because in recent years, researchers working with ancient preserved specimens have begun to extract genetic material from Pleistocene predators, and the results have not always confirmed the tidy narratives. I will not pretend to cite specific studies I cannot verify, but the general direction of ancient DNA research in this space has consistently produced surprises, and the American lion is not immune to that pattern. If you have been following this channel for a while, you will know that one of my genuine enthusiasms is the moment when a fossil or an artifact stops confirming what we expected and starts asking a question we had not thought to ask. This is one of those moments. The bones in the Alaskan permafrost are not just telling us where the American lion lived. They are asking us where it came from, how long it was really there, whether it was a full ecological resident or something more like a periodic range expander, and whether the categories we use to describe prehistoric predator populations are actually adequate to the complexity of what was happening on the mammoth steppe. And then, somewhere around 13,000 years ago, give or take, it stopped. The American lion, along with a remarkable proportion of North America's large mammals, the mammoths, the mastodons, the horses, the camels, the giant ground sloths, disappeared. This extinction event is one of the most intensely studied and argued over questions in all of paleontology, and I am not going to pretend it has been resolved, because it has not. Two broad explanations dominate the debate. One is climate. The end of the last ice age was not a gentle warming. It was a dramatic, in geological terms, rapid transformation of entire ecosystems. The mammoth steppe that had sustained vast populations of large grazers began to fragment, shift, and in many regions disappear entirely. For a predator as large as the American lion, which required enormous caloric input and presumably large prey to provide it, the collapse of prey populations would have been devastating. The other explanation, or rather the complicating factor that refuses to go away, is us. Human beings arrived in the Americas around the same broad window that the Great Extinction unfolded. The timing is uncomfortable. There are researchers who argue it is too close to be coincidental, that human hunters, even in relatively small numbers, could have tipped already stressed megafauna populations past a point of recovery. Others argue the climate signal is sufficient on its own. Most honest assessments of the current evidence land somewhere in the middle, a combination of both, interacting in ways that are genuinely difficult to disentangle from 13,000 years of distance. The Clovis culture, whose distinctive fluted projectile points appear across North America beginning around 13,500 years ago and are among the earliest unambiguous evidence of widespread human presence on the continent, were hunting mammoths and mastodons. We have the kill sites, we have the butchered bones. At Naco, Arizona, and Lena Ranch, excavated in the 1950s, researchers found Clovis points directly associated with mammoth remains. These were not scavengers picking over carcasses. These were hunters capable of bringing down animals that weighed several tons. Whether they hunted lions directly or simply competed with them for the same prey until the prey collapsed is a question the archaeology cannot yet answer with certainty. But the pressure was real, and it arrived precisely when the climate was already squeezing the mammoth steppe from the other direction. What I find most haunting about the American lion specifically is this. It was not some slow, marginal creature that a changing world could easily have outcompeted. It was at the top, it was the apex, and yet it left no descendants, no surviving branch, nothing to carry its genetic line forward. There are no lions in North America today except in zoos. The animal that those Alaskan bones belong to is simply gone, and the ground keeps giving its remains back to us, as if asking a question we do not yet know how to answer. If you find yourself drawn to questions like this, the ones where the fossil record points at something we cannot quite explain, where the deeper you look, the stranger the picture gets, then you are in exactly the right place. This channel exists for that feeling. If you have not subscribed yet, I would genuinely love to have you along for more of these journeys. The thaw line is built on the same curiosity that is probably making you lean forward right now. Come be part of that community. So, what do we actually make of all this? Here is where I land, and I want to be clear that this is my reading of a genuinely unsettled question, not a settled conclusion. The American lion's bones in Alaska are not an error, not a contamination, not a misidentification. They are real, they are numerous, and they represent the remains of an extraordinary animal that was present in that landscape during the Pleistocene. The mystery is not whether the bones are real. The mystery is what they tell us about the animal's origins, its population dynamics, its relationship to the broader Beringian ecosystem, and the nature of its disappearance. What the Boneyards of Alaska keep insisting is that the story is not over. Every new season of erosion, every new stretch of exposed permafrost, has the potential to produce remains that reframe what we thought we knew. Ancient DNA continues to get better and more precise. Analytical techniques for understanding ecological context from bone chemistry and depositional patterns keep improving. The picture that emerges, I suspect, is going to be more complicated and more interesting than either the simple range map or the simple migration model currently suggests. The American lion was real, it was here, and it was magnificent. The honest position is that we are still in the early chapters of understanding what its presence in Alaska actually means. And somehow that feels exactly right. Because the best historical mysteries are never the ones that close neatly. They are the ones that open. I would love to know what you think. In the comments, tell me, where do you stand on the great Pleistocene extinction debate? Was it climate? Was it us? Or something more complicated still? There is no wrong answer, and I genuinely read what you all write down there. Next time, we are going to stay in the Ice Age world but move much further afield, to a site that has quietly rewritten the timeline of when sophisticated human culture first appeared, and to bones there that tell an equally unexpected story. You will not want to miss that one. Until then, keep asking the questions the ground is trying to answer. I'll see you next time.